I'm at the end of 3 weeks of vacation, and when Mike asked me to be a part of this, I was very excited to do it. And then about 4 hours ago, a conflict came up in that my sister, who hasn't been in Rochester for, I don't know, maybe 8 or 10 years, is driving through town and is going to spend the night with us. So Mike was kind enough I recorded what I'm going to say now like an hour ago in case she got here, but she's not here yet. So I get to do both, hang out with my sister and hang out with you first. Yeah, it's cool. Let me just remind you, hopefully, of what you've heard before, or maybe it's the first time you've heard this, but what you do and the role you play at Northridge matters. It really, really matters. And I want to tell you 3 ways in which it matters. Number 1, it matters in our overall strategy for adults. What you do matters because we are out to make more and better adult disciples. That's what we're out to do. And we can't do that without you. And here's what I mean by that. That if a parent doesn't feel comfortable leaving their child in an environment for 70 or 75 minutes, they won't come back. Or they'll sit in the auditorium at whatever campus they come to, but their mind won't be there. Their body will be there, but their mind won't, because their child is somewhere in an unfamiliar environment that they don't feel excited about. So you make it possible for them to sit in whatever auditorium they're sitting in to hear what God wants them to hear. So if we're going to make more and better disciples, we have to have a great kids ministry. And the only way to have a great kids ministry is to have a great kids ministry volunteers. So thank you. We often say this statement to our nursery workers. When you are changing diapers in here, God is changing hearts out there. And in those discouraging moments, when you don't want to attend one and serve one, when a 75-minute service feels like 2 hours, remind yourself that what you do matters for the overall strategy of our church. And it's critically important when we're talking about our target, previously unchurched, unreached people. Those of us who grew up in church, how many of you grew up going to church? Okay, a majority of you involved in children's ministry grew up going to church. And it's hard for us to relate because when I was born, a few days later, I was at church. I probably had an advanced immune system because my parents put me around anybody when I was young. Today, when a child is born, an unchurched mom can't imagine leaving their child with anyone for an hour. Maybe even their spouse they struggle with. And then once dad proves himself reliable, then maybe a grandparent. But even then, they're thinking about their child while they're at that movie with their spouse or at that dinner date. And then eventually, maybe they'll leave their child with a trusted friend or maybe a mature babysitter. And here we are asking previously unchurched people to show up at a place, at a church, and leave their child with people they've never met before. And in our culture, that's just, people in our culture are suspicious of everyone now. My parents would have left me with anyone at church, right? I grew up in the day when if someone's at church, you assume they had good motives. Now, if you're a children's worker, that parent is suspicious of you. And our goal is to get this unchurched mom and her husband, or unchurched mom and her boyfriend, or unchurched mom and her girlfriend to sit in a service and maybe meet God. That's why what you do matters. At our 16.5 conference that we did this past March, we talked about what you need to gain momentum. And I suggested to all the pastors and church leaders that were here that there's 4 things. There's the big 4 of momentum. If you want to create momentum at your church, here's what you got to focus on. Focus on these 4 above all else. Number 1 is you got to have great preaching. If your preaching is not good, you're going to struggle to build momentum. Number 2, excellent music. If your music is not good and relevant and excellent, you're going to have trouble building momentum. Third thing we told these pastors and church leaders is great first impressions. A lot of people make a decision whether they'll return to a church or not before the service ever starts. And the 4th thing that we said you have to build momentum is amazing kids ministry. What I want you to notice is that's the only program on here. And when I first introduced this, I got to tell you that some of our staff pushed back on this a little bit because I talked about if you want to build momentum, it's kids ministry. I didn't mention youth ministry. I didn't mention community groups. Community groups is crucial. Obviously, you know that. Other than Sunday morning, there's no more important program we do than community groups. Youth ministry is absolutely crucial. But if you don't have a great community groups program in your church, and if you don't have a great youth ministry program in your church, you could still gain momentum as a church, but you can't gain it without kids ministry. And so that's why you matter in us making more and better disciples for our whole church. My wife tells me stories of the nursery, and there's a parent that had not left their child. And to leave them in the nursery is scary. We have parents that stalk the nursery all the time. They hold their baby and they look in there, is it really safe? And they walk out and then they walk in and walk out in the nursery. The nursery worker's like, can I take him or her? No, I'm just looking around. Parents are nervous. And there's one parent that they know someone that comes to church, and one of our ministry volunteers, you might even be here, approached that parent and said, what church service do you attend? This is at Irondequoit. I'll go to that church service and work in the nursery every week. And that's what gave that parent that confidence to go there and be there, because that worker, that ministry volunteer was there every week. And now that child, gets down out of mom's arms and runs into the nursery on her own, which that mom never thought would happen, because what you do matters. There's a couple on our Pi Squared list. They have one child, and that child is really the idol of their life. They're not followers of Christ yet. And other than grandparents, and I think my wife and daughters, I'm not sure they've ever had anyone else watch their children except one place, Northridge Church, because their son loves coming to Northridge Church and talks about things that he's learning he's 2 years old, but he's talking about things he's learning in his environment and shocking mom and dad. And I'm convinced we're going to reach those parents one day, and it will be because of our kids' ministry, because without you, they wouldn't come to church. What you do matters for us making more and better disciples. And that's seen in kids that pull their parents to church every week because they don't want to miss what Mr. Walters or Mr. Smith or Mr. Dyer or Mr. Dudley is going to do on a Sunday morning. And frankly, when it comes to the big four for our momentum, and this is true, the preaching could stink, the music could be a big fail, and the first impressions team can drop the ball. But if Johnny comes out of High Point saying, Mom, Dad, that was so cool, can we come back next week? Mom and Dad probably will do it. And so what you do matters for us making more and better disciples. Secondly, what you do matters because we want to make more and better little disciples. We don't just want to make adult disciples. We want to make more and better little disciples. And this is not babysitting. We want to make more and better little disciples. It's not simply about making disciples of their parents who come. It's about making disciples of the children who come to our kids' ministries. And the reality is that my preaching ability and my preaching style is never going to communicate well to a second grader. It's not. And our community groups would be a disaster if it was for adults and their kids. You matter because we want to make more and better little disciples. And the reality is that you've probably seen the statistics. If a child grows up in church, if they grow up in church, if they haven't trusted Christ by the time they're in junior high, 90% statistic tells us they never will. Think about that. If a child grows up in church, if they have not trusted Christ by the time they're in junior high, 90% of them never will. What you do matters in making more and better little disciples. In our church, it really matters. In fact, we take a survey every May, and here's one of the statistics that stood out to us. Do you know that over 50% of our church is under the age of 30? Over 50% of Northridge is under the age of 30. We are a church filled with children. We're filled with young adults. We're filled with young parents. And if you take the kids out of it completely and you just talk about the 3 auditorium attendances, over 50% of our auditorium attendance is under the age of 35. We are a young church. If we don't do kids ministry well, we will not make more and better adult disciples or more and better little disciples. One other thing I want to mention about why what you do matters. What you do matters because, here's the third one, because of our attend one, serve one strategy that's going to be happening at all 3 of our campuses. It's already in place at Irondequoit, but it's going to be at all 3 of our campuses. It means this, that our children's environments need to be loving and safe enough that our parents, that our volunteers, whether they volunteer in children's ministry or not, wherever they volunteer, that they feel our children's ministry is a safe, loving environment so they can leave their child there for almost 3 hours on Sunday. Our kids' environments need to be engaging enough that a child thinks that sitting through High Point twice is the coolest thing ever. Our kids' environments need to be beneficial enough that our volunteers feel like the content their child gets in that environment is helpful for them as parents as they try to raise their children to know and love Christ. So what you do matters. It matters for 3 reasons. Number 1, it matters because we want to make more and better adult disciples. It matters because we want to make more and better little disciples. And it matters because of our attend one, serve one strategy. And I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for what you do. When I'm not preaching, I walk around to different environments, and I know this. Last summer, on a vacation Sunday, Sue needed help in the nursery, so I helped. I'm telling you, that 75 minutes felt like 2 hours. And I'm not kidding. I am not built for the nursery. It was torture for me. I'm blown away by those who I love my kids. I'll stop there. And I've walked into various environments. I've walked into, I know what my gifting is and isn't. And I know that I have an ability to communicate, but I go down to High Point and I see what they do in High Point. And this is not false modesty. All I can think is I could never do that. And they do it so well, no matter the environment. So I love what you do. I love watching what you do. Emily, do you want to head out there? I'm thankful for you. So as we move into another ministry season, I pray that God energizes you, blesses you, and encourages you with this reality. What you do matters.